Rain hammers against a warehouse roof as a young heir bleeds out on cold concrete, betrayed by the boyfriend who once swore forever and the best friend who called himself family. Somewhere in the dark, his father's empire is already being carved apart and sold off, one quiet signature at a time. But some stories refuse to stay buried. When he opens his eyes again, he is 20 years old, standing at the very beginning of the same conspiracy, every piece still in play, except this time one powerful man refuses to look away, no matter how many times he's pushed back. What does the Alpha CEO already know that no one else does, and why would he never ever let this heir go? Here's a story worth clearing your evening for. A man reborn at 20 with every memory of the betrayal that once killed him, and one impossible decision to make all over again. If you've ever wondered what you'd do differently with a second chance at love, we genuinely want to hear it in the comments. The rain hammered on the warehouse roof, relentless and metallic, drowning out everything except the sound of my own ragged breathing. I lay on the cold concrete, blood pooling beneath me, in a dark, spreading stain that seemed to drink up whatever warmth was left in my body. My vision blurred at the edges, gray creeping in like an unwelcome tide, but I could still see him standing over me. Julian Kane, my boyfriend, my partner, the man I had trusted with every fragile, hopeful piece of my heart for 5 years. He looked different in the dim, flickering light, still handsome, still with that sharp jaw and artfully tousled dark hair, but his blue eyes held none of the warmth I'd spent years convincing myself was real. Instead, they glittered with something cold and final. Satisfaction. "Sorry, Kai," he said, adjusting his cufflinks like he was late for a dinner party rather than standing over my dying body. "But you really should have read the fine print. The Ashford Group shares are mine now. You signed them over so beautifully, so trustingly. It was almost too easy." I tried to speak. Blood bubbled in my throat instead. "Why?" I wanted to scream. "I loved you. I gave you everything." "Don't look so betrayed." Julian crouched down and patted my cheek with a gloved hand, the gesture almost tender if you didn't know better. "You were useful, darling, for a while, but useful things eventually break, and broken things get thrown away." Behind him, another figure stepped out of the shadows. Eli Marsh. My best friend since we were 7 years old, the boy who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd held my hair back the night I got food poisoning at a frat party, who'd been my brother in every way that mattered. He didn't look at my face. "Is it done?" he asked Julian, his voice flat as a closed door. "Almost." Julian stood, brushing off his knees. "The car's already staged. It'll look like an accident, poor Kai, driving too fast in the rain. Such a tragedy." Eli finally glanced down at me, and for half a second something flickered behind his eyes. "Regret? No, impatience. Let's go. The buyers are waiting." Buyers. They were selling my family's company, the legacy my parents had built from nothing, and I had handed it to them wrapped in a bow, because I was fool enough to think love meant surrender. The warehouse door groaned open, letting in a gust of wind and rain. I was fading now, my heartbeat slowing to an irregular, dragging thud. I thought of my parents' faces. I thought of the years I'd wasted chasing Julian's approval, twisting myself into shapes that pleased him, sanding down every rough, real edge of myself, until there was nothing left but an obedient, empty vessel for his ambition. And then, impossibly, I heard shouting, "Kai!" The voice was raw, broken, desperate in a way I had never once heard from him. It cut through the fog of my dying mind like a blade. Heavy footsteps pounded against the concrete. Julian swore. Eli made a startled sound. I couldn't turn my head to see, but I didn't need to. Nathaniel Vaughn, the most powerful CEO in the country. A man I had spent 3 years actively avoiding, because his intensity unnerved me, because his dark eyes always seemed to see straight through the performance I put on for everyone else, because every conversation with him left me feeling stripped bare and, worse, known. I had pushed him away at every turn, embarrassed by his attention, half convinced he was mocking me, or testing me, or playing some game I didn't have the rules for. He dropped to his knees beside me, his usually immaculate suit soaked through with rain and blood, my blood. His hands, those elegant, commanding hands that signed billion-dollar deals without a tremor, shook as they hovered over my wounds, afraid to press too hard, afraid to hurt me further. "No." His voice cracked like thunder splitting open. "No, no, no, Kai. Look at me, damn you." I managed to focus on his face. He was beautiful in his anguish, dark hair plastered to his forehead, gray eyes wide and wild, that stern, composed mouth trembling. I had never once seen him anything less than in control. Now he looked shattered, and some small, dying part of me thought, so this is what he looks like when the mask finally comes off. I never let myself see it before. Nathaniel, I tried to say. It came out a wet rattle. Don't talk. His voice broke on the command. He tore off his jacket and pressed it hard against my chest, trying to staunch bleeding that wouldn't stop. I've called an ambulance. They're coming. Just hold on. Please, Kai. I'm here. I'm right here. Julian laughed from somewhere behind us. How touching. The great Nathaniel Vaughn, reduced to a sniveling mess. Don't bother, Vaughn. He's already gone. Nathaniel didn't look away from me. His hands were red with my blood, and tears tracked down his face, mixing with the rain. Actual tears. From the man the business press called the Ice King. You idiot, he choked out, pressing his forehead to mine, his skin fever-hot against my cooling cheek. You beautiful, stubborn idiot. I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you. Why wouldn't you ever look at me? Why did you always run? I wanted to tell him I was sorry. For every cold word, every dismissive glance, every time I'd chosen Julian's shallow charm over Nathaniel's quiet, steady presence at the edges of every gala, every boardroom. But I was too tired. Stay with me, Nathaniel begged, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a prayer. I love you. I've loved you for years. Please. Just stay. I love you. The last thing I felt was his lips pressing against my forehead, warm and trembling, and the sound of his heart breaking as mine finally stopped. Then darkness. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Vanilla and cedar, not rust and blood. Soft cotton sheets, not cold concrete. And light, bright, insistent, golden morning light pouring through curtains I recognized with a jolt that sat me bolt upright in bed. My childhood bedroom. I stared around, heart hammering against my ribs like something trying to break out. The navy blue walls. The shelf of vintage cameras my dad had collected since college. The poster of an indie band I'd loved at 19, back when I still thought being melancholy was a personality trait. I was dead. I had felt myself die. I had heard Nathaniel sobbing as the world went black. So why was I here? I lunged for the phone on my nightstand, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen lit with the date, and my breath left me in a rush. May 14th, 5 years ago. My 20th birthday. No, I whispered, then louder. No, no, no. I scrambled out of bed and stumbled to the mirror. The face staring back was younger, softer, unmarked by everything that would carve itself into my features by 25. No scar above my eyebrow from the accident Julian would stage when I was 22. No hollow cheeks from the slow, engineered starvation Eli would talk me into under the guise of helpful dietary advice. Just me, young, whole, alive. I pressed my palms against the glass, watching my reflection do the same, half convinced this was some cruel afterlife hallucination. But the glass was cool and solid under my hands. My pulse was racing. And the memories, oh God, the memories, were flooding back with perfect, agonizing clarity. I knew exactly what Julian would say when he called in an hour, all honeyed tones and promises of a surprise birthday dinner. I knew Eli would show up at noon with my favorite coffee, playing the devoted best friend, while quietly forwarding my family's financial documents to Julian's private server. I knew that in 3 months, Julian would ask me to temporarily co-sign a transfer of my shares to protect them from a hostile takeover, and I, blind and desperate to be loved, would agree. I knew everything, and I had a second chance to burn it all down before it ever touched me. I stood there a long moment, staring at my own wild-eyed reflection, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I laughed. It started as a hysterical giggle and built into something full and loud that echoed off the navy walls. Okay, I told my reflection, wiping tears from my cheeks. Okay, let's do this, you stupid, beautiful universe. Round 2, by the time Julian called at exactly 9:47 a.m. I remembered the exact time, which felt pathetic and useful in equal measure. I had already showered, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that made my storm blue eyes look almost silver, and downed 2 cups of coffee while pacing my room and plotting. My phone buzzed with his name, and my stomach twisted, not with longing, but with fury. Hot, bright, righteous fury that tasted like copper and vengeance. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice light and breathless, exactly how he liked me. Vulnerable. Eager Julian. Hi, oh my God, I was just thinking about you. His laugh was smooth as silk, and it made my skin crawl in a way it never had before, because now I knew exactly what that silk was hiding. Happy birthday, baby, 20 years old. God, that makes me feel ancient at 24. You're not ancient, I cooed, crossing my eyes at my own reflection in the window. You're distinguished. He ate that up, same as he always had. I've got a surprise for you tonight. That new French place downtown. And then, well, I'll let the rest be a surprise. Wear something nice. I want to show you off. Show me off like a trophy, like property. Can't wait, I said, letting my voice drop into the whispery, adoring register that used to make the old me blush. You always know exactly what I need. After I hung up, I stuck my finger down my throat and made gagging noises at the window. Then I straightened my tie and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who knew the future and was very much looking forward to ruining someone's day. Eli arrived at 12:03, right on schedule, holding 2 coffees and wearing the charming, boyish grin that had disarmed me for 15 years. "Birthday boy," he crowed, pulling me into a hug I endured rather than returned. He smelled like cheap cologne and betrayal. 20, officially no longer a teenager. How's it feel? Enlightening, I said, taking the coffee and sipping it. Too sweet, exactly how I used to drink it before I realized Eli always ordered it that way to remind me that he knew me better than I knew myself. A small, subtle power play I'd been too naive to see. Thanks, Elle. You're the best. We sat on my bed like old times, and Eli launched into a story about his new job at some investment firm, dropping casual questions about my parents' company between sentences. How's Ashford Group doing? Any big moves coming? Your dad mentioned expanding into tech. I deflected with practiced ease, laughing at his jokes, leaning into his shoulder when he threw an arm around me. All the while my mind was somewhere else entirely, specifically on Nathaniel Vaughn. I'd spent the whole morning, once the initial shock wore off, doing research. Vaughn Holdings was already a massive force in the business world, but in this timeline Nathaniel was only 26, still building his empire, not yet the untouchable titan he'd become. And more importantly, I remembered something from my past life that I'd dismissed at the time as unimportant. In 3 months, Nathaniel would make a bid for a small tech startup my father had also been eyeing. Julian had wanted that startup too. It was the key to his plan to infiltrate the tech sector using my family's capital as leverage. In my previous life, Julian had raged for days when Nathaniel outbid him, and I'd made the mistake of commiserating, bad-mouthing Nathaniel right along with him. But I also remembered with crystal clarity the look on Nathaniel's face at the Ashford Group Summer Gala, 6 months from now. I'd been on Julian's arm, laughing at one of his jokes about Nathaniel's stick-up-his-ass formality, and I'd glanced across the room to find Nathaniel already watching me. Not with the cold indifference I'd convinced myself he felt. With longing so raw it had stolen my breath for a full second before Julian tugged me away and I let myself forget it. I'd been so stupid. Earth to Kai. Eli waved a hand in front of my face. "You okay, buddy? You spaced out there. Just thinking about my future," I said, and for the first time that day, my smile was genuine. "It's going to look very different from what I expected." Eli grinned, misinterpreting completely. "Julian's got big plans for you too, huh? I'm happy for you, man. Really, I bet you are," I thought. "Happy counting the money you'll make selling me out." "Yeah," I said softly. "Big plans." The restaurant was exactly as I remembered. Intimate lighting, absurdly expensive wine, Julian in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He'd ordered for me, of course. He always did. In his mind, he was being chivalrous. In reality, it was about control. "Trust me, you'll love the duck," he said, not even looking up from the menu. "It's exquisite." "I'm actually in the mood for the steak," I said, closing my menu with a sharp snap. Julian blinked. Genuinely startled, I never contradicted him, not in public. "The duck is the chef's specialty, Kai, and I'm craving iron, doctor's orders." I smiled sweetly. "You know how anemic I get." It was a lie. I'd never been anemic in my life, but he didn't know that. He didn't know me. Not really. He knew the version of me I'd performed for him, a hollow shell of agreeableness and gratitude. "Of course," he recovered smoothly, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "The steak, then. Good for you, standing up for yourself." Condescending piece of work. Dinner went on with Julian monologuing about his latest acquisition, his hand occasionally reaching across the table to cover mine. Each touch made my skin crawl, but I endured it, nodding at the right moments, gasping appropriately at his brilliance. All the while I was scanning the room. I knew Nathaniel would be here. It was a ridiculous gamble based on a half-remembered gossip column from my past life. Vaughn spotted dining alone at Le Choux, looking brooding and delicious, but it was all I had. I needed to see him. I needed to speak to him before I lost my nerve. And then, there he was. He came in through the private dining entrance, tall and imposing in a black suit that fit him like a second skin, dark hair swept back from a sharp aristocratic face, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked built for issuing commands and for kissing someone senseless in equal measure. 26 years old, and he already carried himself like a king. My heart stopped, actually stopped, then restarted with a vengeance that left me dizzy. 2 associates flanked him, but his gray eyes swept the room with a predator's alertness, and then they found me. I watched recognition flicker across his face. We'd met twice before, at industry events where my father had introduced us. Both times I'd been awkward and dismissive, intimidated by his intensity, eager to get back to Julian's side. Both times he'd watched me leave with an expression I had badly misread as disapproval. Now, knowing what I knew, I saw it for what it actually was: hunger. Carefully banked, painfully restrained hunger. I didn't look away. I held his gaze. And then I smiled, not the performative smile I'd been giving Julian all night, but a real one. Soft, hopeful, a little shy. "Hello," I tried to say with my eyes. "I see you. I'm sorry I never did before." Nathaniel went very still. One of his associates said something to him. He didn't respond. He just stared, and I watched a cascade of emotions cross his face. Surprise, confusion, and a flash of something like hope, quickly smothered under his usual mask of cool detachment. Then Julian followed my gaze, and his hand tightened painfully around mine. "Vaughn," he said, his voice dropping to a sneer. "What's he doing here?" Slumming it with the rest of us. I used the distraction to gently extract my hand from Julian's grip. "I should say hello. Dad wanted me to run something by him about the Meridian project. Let it wait." Julian's grip tightened further. "Now? In the middle of dinner? It'll just take a moment." I stood, straightening my jacket. "Order me that steak, would you? Medium rare. I'll be right back." I walked away before he could object, my heart hammering so hard I was sure the whole restaurant could hear it. Nathaniel hadn't moved. He watched me approach with the wary stillness of a man who expected, as a matter of course, to be disappointed. "Mr. Vaughn," I said, stopping in front of him. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Kai Ashford. We met at the Hartwell Gala." His voice was a deep, smooth baritone that sent a shiver down my spine. "And at the Ashford Group launch in March. I remember Mr. Ashford." "Mr. Ashford." Distance. Caution. "I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner," I said, glancing at his associates, who were watching this exchange with undisguised curiosity. But I was hoping I could steal a private moment. His gray eyes searched my face with an intensity that should have felt uncomfortable, and instead felt like coming home. He was looking for something. Mockery, maybe, or a setup. I let him look. I had nothing left to hide. "Gentlemen," he said to his associates, not breaking eye contact with me, "give us a moment." They scattered like startled pigeons, leaving us alone near the private dining entrance. Nathaniel stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and something darker, something that was just him, close enough that I had to tip my head back to hold his eyes. "You have my attention, Mr. Ashford," he said quietly, "though I confess I'm curious why your companion doesn't look pleased. Julian's pleasure isn't my priority." I didn't bother glancing back. "Actually, that's why I wanted to talk to you. I have a proposition." "A proposition." One dark eyebrow lifted. "At a restaurant, on your birthday. You know it's my birthday?" The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I make it my business to know things about people who interest me. People who interest me." I filed that away for later dissection, preferably while screaming into a pillow. "I want to discuss a partnership between Ashford Group and Vaughn Holdings." He went quiet, studying me. "Your father has declined 3 meetings with my team this month." "My father has," I emphasized. "I, however, think it would be mutually beneficial, and I think there are other ventures where our interests might align, specifically preventing certain parties from acquiring assets that would be detrimental to both our companies." I was being vague, careful. "I couldn't exactly say. I know Julian Kane is planning to steal a tech startup out from under you in 3 months, using stolen insider information, and I want to help you stop him because I've already lived through this once, and also because I fell in love with you at the moment you watched me die. That tended to get people committed." But Nathaniel was sharp. His eyes narrowed. "You're referring to the Nextlink acquisition." I blinked. "Nextlink, the startup. You know about that?" "I know Julian Kane has been quietly approaching Nextlink's board," he said, voice dropping lower, more intimate. "I know he's using shell companies to mask his interest. And I know," his gaze flicked to Julian, glaring at us from across the room, That he's been using his relationship with you to gain access to your father's financial data. Data that would help him outbid everyone, including me. My blood ran cold. You know all that? I know a great many things, Kai. The use of my first name landed like a brand. What I don't know is why you're telling me this. Unless, he stepped closer, invading my space in a way that should have felt threatening and instead felt like shelter, unless you finally realized that the man you're sitting with is a predator. I swallowed hard, and what if I have? Then I'd wonder what changed. His voice went soft, dangerously soft, because 3 months ago you looked at me like I was something to scrape off your shoe, and now you're here, offering alliances, looking at me like... Like what? I whispered. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. Like I'm the answer to a question you've been afraid to ask. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The noise of the restaurant faded to a dull roar, and all I could see, all I could feel, his body, the careful, restrained way he held himself, as if moving too fast might shatter whatever strange spell had brought me to him. You are, I said, the truth falling out of me before I could stop it. You're the answer. You've been the answer for a while. I think I was just too stupid to do the math. Something flared behind his eyes. Heat, hope, a wildness barely leashed. Kai, Kai. Julian's voice cut through the moment like a knife. He was standing behind me, his hand landing possessively on my shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. There you are. I was starting to think you'd abandoned me for better company. The sarcasm dripped from every word, but Nathaniel's reaction was immediate and terrifying. His eyes went arctic. His posture shifted from intrigued to outright dangerous, and he looked at Julian's hand on my shoulder the way a man calculates the most efficient way to remove an obstacle permanently. Mr. Kane, Nathaniel said, in a register that made the hair on my neck stand up. I believe Kai was in the middle of a conversation. And I believe, Julian said, pulling me back a step, that Kai's business with you is concluded. Isn't it, baby? Baby. He only called me that when he felt threatened, when he needed to reassert ownership. I looked at Julian's face, at the fake smile that never reached his eyes, at the calculation running behind his charm, and I thought of the warehouse, of the blood, of him saying broken things get thrown away. Then I looked at Nathaniel, the man who had wept over my dying body, who'd begged me to stay, who'd loved me when I'd given him nothing back but cold shoulders and careless words. I made my choice. Actually, Julian, I said, stepping forward out of his grip, closer to Nathaniel, my business with Mr. Vaughn is just beginning. I'll be taking the car home. Don't wait up. Julian's face went slack with shock. What? I turned to look at him and let every ounce of hatred I felt bleed into my smile. Enjoy the duck. I'm sure it'll be the only thing you get to swallow tonight. I turned back to Nathaniel, whose expression had shifted from dangerous to utterly stunned, and held out my hand. Mr. Vaughn, would you do me the honor of finishing this conversation somewhere more private? I find I've suddenly lost my appetite for French cuisine. He looked at my hand, then at Julian, then back at me, slowly, carefully, like I was a dream that might vanish if he moved too fast. Then he reached out and took it. His hand was warm and strong and swallowed mine completely. It would be my pleasure, Kai, he said, and the way he said my name was a promise. We walked out together, leaving Julian Kane gaping behind us. The night air was cool and smelled like rain and possibility. Nathaniel didn't let go of my hand. In fact, he laced our fingers together, thumb brushing over my knuckles in a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. Do you have any idea what you just did? He asked quietly as his driver pulled the car around. I hope so. I laughed, a little unsteady. But if I'm honest, I'm improvising a lot right now. He laughed too, a startled, genuine sound that transformed his whole face from intimidating to breathtaking. Improvising. You just publicly severed ties with Julian Kane in the middle of your own birthday dinner and left with his biggest rival. The business papers will have a field day tomorrow. Let them, I said, sliding into the back seat of his town car. I'm done performing for other people's expectations. Nathaniel got in beside me, and the door closed with a solid final sound. The interior was warm and smelled like him, and suddenly we were very alone, very close, and I was intensely aware that I had just upended my entire life based on memories of a future that hadn't happened yet, and a confession whispered by a dying man. Kai. He turned to face me, city lights sliding shadows across his face. I need you to be very clear with me right now, because I'm not a man who handles uncertainty well, and I've wanted things from you that I've spent years convincing myself I could never have. So, if this is a game, If this is some elaborate revenge plot against Cain, tell me now. I'll help you ruin him regardless. I've wanted to for years, but don't." His voice cracked, just slightly. "Don't make me hope for something that isn't real." I reached out, my hand trembling, and cupped his cheek. His stubble was rough under my palm, and he leaned into the touch with a desperation that broke something open in my chest. "Nathaniel," I whispered, "it's not a game. I know I have no right to ask you to trust me. I know I've been awful to you, distant, dismissive, and I can't explain why I've changed without sounding insane. But I need you to believe that walking over to you tonight was the truest thing I've ever done. I'm not performing, I'm not manipulating, I'm just finally going where I belong." His eyes closed, long lashes brushing his cheeks. He turned his face into my palm and pressed a kiss there, so soft I almost missed it. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear you say something like that." Then let me say more. Emboldened by his response, by the warmth of him, by the sheer miracle of being alive and here with him at all, I leaned in. "Take me somewhere, anywhere. I don't want to go home yet. I don't want this night to end." Nathaniel opened his eyes, and the emotion in them was so naked, so unguarded. It stole what was left of my breath. "My penthouse," he said. "It's not far, Kai. But if you're playing with me, you should know I'm not sure I'll survive it. I'm not sure I'll survive you. I never have been." I leaned forward, close enough to feel his breath on my lips. "Then it's a good thing I'm not playing," I breathed, "because I'm planning to stay a very long time." Nathaniel's penthouse was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like I'd imagined. Sleek, of course, glass, steel, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my parents' house. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a field of fallen stars. But there were also books, stacks of them on every table, dog-eared paperbacks mixed in with leather-bound first editions. A throw blanket, shockingly soft, draped over one of the leather sofas, and on the grand piano in the corner, he had a grand piano, of course he did, sat a single framed photograph. I walked toward it, Nathaniel hovering behind me with the careful tension of a man who had invited a wild animal into his home and wasn't sure whether it would bite or purr. The photo was of me. Not a professional shot, a candid, taken at some charity event I barely remembered, laughing, head thrown back, eyes crinkled with joy. I looked young, happy, free. "You kept this," I said, my voice hushed. Nathaniel stood beside me, hands in his pockets, posture defensive. "I told you, I've wanted things from you for a long time." "How long?" He was quiet a moment. "The Hartwell Gala, 2 years ago. You were 19, barely legal to drink, and you'd spilled champagne on your tie. You were trying to hide it behind a napkin, looking so embarrassed and so beautiful I couldn't look away. I made a fool of myself trying to introduce myself, and you—" A rueful smile touched his lips. "You asked if I was security and asked where the bathroom was." I groaned, covering my face with both hands. "Oh my God, I remember that. I was so nervous I could barely see straight. I thought you were the most intimidating man I'd ever met." "So I gathered. You said as much to Julian later, within my hearing." That was the first time I realized my interest in you wasn't only unrequited, it was actively unwelcome. I dropped my hands and turned to face him. "Nathaniel, I was an idiot. A nervous, insecure idiot who thought that if someone wasn't constantly showering me with performative affection, they didn't care at all. Julian told me you were arrogant, that you looked down on people like me, and I believed him because I was too scared to trust my own instincts. Now I know that the man who looks at me like I'm the only thing in the room is the man worth trusting." I stepped closer and reached for his hand. He let me take it, fingers curling around mine. "I know I'm asking for a leap of faith here," I said. "I showed up out of nowhere tonight, acting like a completely different person, and I can't explain everything yet. But I need you to know that I see you. I see the way you watch out for people even when you pretend not to care. I see the way you fund literacy programs without putting your name on a single one of them. I see the way you play piano when you think no one's listening." His eyes widened. "How did you? And I see," I continued, softer now, "the way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm precious, like I'm yours and I want to be. God, Nathaniel, I want to be yours so badly it terrifies me." He made a sound half groan, half prayer, and then his hands were framing my face, and his mouth was on mine. The kiss was everything. It wasn't gentle, not entirely. There was too much hunger, too many years of suppressed longing behind it for gentleness. But it was reverent. He kissed me like I was sacred and essential, and his, tongue sliding against mine, with a confidence that turned my knees to water, hands tilting my head to deepen the angle. I clutched his jacket and pulled him closer, walking backward until my spine hit the cool glass of the window, his body furnace warm against my front. He kissed me until my lips felt swollen and my whole body felt molten, and then he pulled back just far enough to rest his forehead against mine. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, voice rough. "Tell me to stop, Kai, because I don't think I can if you don't. I've wanted this for too long. I've wanted you for too long." I arched up and bit his lower lip, gentle but firm. "Don't you dare stop." He growled, actually growled, and lifted me clean off my feet. I wrapped my legs around his waist as he carried me through the penthouse, past the kitchen and the study, into a bedroom that smelled like linen and him. He laid me down like I was something holy, and then he was over me, kissing my jaw, my throat, the hollow of my collarbone. "Nathaniel?" I gasped, fisting a hand in his hair. Wait, I need to tell you something first, before this goes any further. About Julian, about Eli. It's important." He stilled and lifted his head, eyes dark with want but suddenly fully alert. "Tell me." So I did, not the broad strokes he already suspected, but the missing pieces he didn't have. That it was Eli, not some anonymous contact, physically pulling files off my father's servers under the cover of 15 years of friendship. That in exactly 3 months, Julian would corner me with tears in his eyes and ask me to temporarily co-sign a transfer of my Ashford Group shares, framed as protection from a hostile takeover that didn't exist, when in reality the transfer itself was the takeover. That the paperwork was likely already drafted, sitting in a drawer somewhere, waiting for me to be desperate and grateful enough to sign it without reading past the first page. I didn't tell him about the warehouse, or my death, or the strange, impossible fact of my rebirth. Not yet, not when everything between us was still so fragile. But I told him everything else, the real information, the dangerous, specific, actionable truth he'd need to move first. When I finished, Nathaniel had gone very still. "You have proof of this?" "Eli's been forwarding encrypted files to an account I can trace." A half-truth wrapped around the real one. I overheard Julian bragging about it once when he'd had too much to drink. He thought I was too stupid to understand what he was saying. Nathaniel's expression darkened. "He called you stupid." "He's called me a lot of things," I said lightly, "most of them behind my back. The point is, I want to stop him. I want to protect my family's company, and I want to do it with your help, if you'll have me." He was quiet a long moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me want to squirm. Then he leaned down and kissed me again, soft and sweet, nothing like the desperate hunger of before. "You're not stupid," he murmured against my lips. "You're brilliant and brave and so damn beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. And yes, I'll help you. We'll ruin Julian Kane and Eli Marsh so thoroughly they never recover, but not tonight." "No, no." He kissed my nose, my cheek, the corner of my mouth. "Tonight is for us. For finally having something I've spent years too afraid to even dream about. The war can wait until morning." I smiled and tugged him back down. "Then what are you waiting for, Mr. Vaughn? Show me what I've been missing." He did, thoroughly, patiently, until I was a boneless, blissed-out mess tangled in his sheets, my heart so full it felt like it might crack open. As I drifted off to sleep in his arms, his chest warm against my back, his heartbeat a steady drum in my ear, I thought, this is what home feels like. Not a place, a person. And for the first time since I'd opened my eyes that morning, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was excited to build it. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of strategy, stolen moments, and the kind of banter that made Nathaniel's assistants blush and his board members deeply uncomfortable. "Kai." Nathaniel looked up from his tablet one morning, a frown fighting a losing battle against the amusement in his eyes. "Are you sure you want to leak this particular document? Once it's out, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle." I plucked the tablet out of his hands, set it on the desk, and slid onto his lap, wrapping my arms around his neck. "Are you questioning my strategic brilliance, Mr. Vaughn? Because I'll have you know I spent all of last night planning this while you were snoring beside me." "I do not snore. You absolutely snore. It's adorable. Like a very large, very dignified bear hibernating. A bear. A sexy bear. A bear I'd very much like to. Kai." His voice dropped into that warning register that did unfair things to my insides. "We're in my office, with glass walls." I glanced over my shoulder at the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the executive floor. "They're tinted. They're partially tinted." "Then let them watch," I said, leaning in to nip at his jaw. "Let them see that the great Nathaniel Vaughn is thoroughly, hopelessly besotted. It'll do wonders for your terrifying reputation." He groaned, hands tightening on my waist. You're going to be the death of me. Too late. I pressed a kiss to the pulse point in his throat. You're stuck with me now. I'm like a barnacle, a very handsome, very clingy barnacle. He laughed, that rich, startled sound I'd already learned to treasure, and pulled me into a proper kiss that left us both breathless and rumpled, and neither of us particularly caring about the glass walls. But it wasn't all banter and stolen afternoons. We worked hard. With Nathaniel's resources and my inside knowledge, carefully framed as intuition, and overheard conversations rather than the truth, which was a memory of a life I'd already lived, we began quietly dismantling Julian's web of shell companies. Nathaniel's legal team was relentless, his financial analysts razor-sharp, his private investigators terrifyingly thorough. I played my part on the home front too. I let Julian believe I was in the middle of a temporary breakdown, some rebellious phase that had led to my dramatic exit from the restaurant. I answered his calls with just enough wistfulness to keep him hoping I'd come crawling back. I met Eli for coffee, smiling through gritted teeth, while he pumped me for information about my father's board meetings. It made my skin crawl, but Nathaniel was always there afterward, waiting in the car or the penthouse or just on the other end of the phone, a steady anchor. "How'd it go?" he asked one evening after I'd spent 3 hours with Eli at a cafe, pretending to be heartbroken over my fight with Julian. I think he bought it. I kicked off my shoes in Nathaniel's entryway. He spent an hour telling me how devastated Julian is and how I need to stop being so sensitive. Then he asked about Dad's quarterly projections 3 separate times. Nathaniel's expression went hard. "I want this over soon." "Soon," I promised, going to him and letting his arms close around me. "But first, I want them to think they've won. I want Julian to make his move for NextLink. I want him to commit everything, his money, his reputation, every criminal favor he's ever called in. And then I want to pull the rug out so completely he never gets up again." "You're ruthless," Nathaniel murmured, but there was pride threaded through his voice. "I learned from the best." I smiled up at him. "You're a very bad influence, Mr. Vaughn. Is that so?" He lifted me suddenly, making me yelp, and carried me toward the bedroom. "Then allow me to further corrupt you." "By all means," I laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Corrupt away." There were harder nights too, the kind the banter was built to paper over. One evening, 2 months in, I came back from another lunch with Eli and locked myself in Nathaniel's bathroom, sick to my stomach, because he'd spent the whole meal telling me, gently, kindly, the way only someone who has practiced cruelty until it sounds like concern can manage, that I'd gotten a little soft since the breakup, and maybe I should think about cutting back on carbs before the gala photos went out. The old version of me, the one from my first life, would have thanked him for caring. This version of me threw up his lemonade and cried on the tile floor until Nathaniel found me. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on the cold tile beside me in his $3,000 suit, ruining the knees of his trousers without comment, and pulled me into his side. "I hate him," I said finally, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "I hate that some part of me still flinches when he says things like that. Like he's still allowed to have an opinion about my body." "He isn't." Nathaniel's voice was low, steady, furious in a way that had nothing performative in it. He was never allowed to. "What he did to you wasn't concern, Kai. It was a leash with velvet on it. You're allowed to hate him for that. You're also allowed to still be healing from it. Both things are true. How do you always know what to say?" "I don't," he admitted, pressing a kiss to my temple. "I'm mostly terrified of saying the wrong thing and losing you before I've even really had you. I just try to imagine what I would want someone to say to me, and then I say that instead." We sat there a long time, my head on his shoulder, his thumb tracing slow, wordless circles against my back, and for the first time since I'd woken up in my childhood bedroom, I let myself feel something other than fury or fear. I let myself feel safe. The Ashford Group Summer Gala was the social event of the season, and in my previous life it had been the night everything began to unravel. That timeline, Julian had used the gala to cement his image as the perfect son-in-law, charming my father's board, making careful inroads with my mother, and convincing me to introduce him to our largest private investor, a meeting he'd used to plant the first seeds of doubt about my father's stability. By the end of that summer, the investor had pulled his money, weakening Ashford Group just enough for Julian's hostile takeover to eventually succeed. This time, I had a different plan. "Stop fidgeting," Nathaniel said, adjusting his cufflinks in the elevator mirror. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, dark hair swept back, gray eyes gleaming with something like predatory anticipation. "I'm not fidgeting," I said, adjusting my bow tie for the 5th time. "I'm preparing." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Nervous?" "A little," I admitted. "Julian will be there. Eli too. Half the room already thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown because I dumped Julian and took up with you. Let them think it." Nathaniel stepped close, fixing my tie with efficient, gentle fingers. "Tonight we show them the truth. We show them that Kai Ashford isn't a pawn to be moved at anyone's will. He's a king, and he's playing his own game." I smiled, leaning into his touch. "When did you get so good at pep talks?" "I had excellent motivation." He kissed my forehead. "Now, are you ready to destroy your enemies and look fabulous doing it? I thought you'd never ask." The gala was held in the Crystal Ballroom, an Art Deco masterpiece that glittered like the inside of a diamond. My parents greeted us at the entrance, and I watched my father's face carefully as he shook Nathaniel's hand. "Vaughn," my father said, gruff but not unfriendly. "I'll admit, when Kai told me he was bringing you instead of Julian, I thought he'd lost his mind. But he's been different these last few months. Sharper, happier. If you're responsible for that, you're welcome in my home." "Dad," I muttered, embarrassed. Nathaniel, however, was utterly serious. "Mr. Ashford, your son is the most remarkable person I've ever met. I consider it the greatest privilege of my life to stand beside him. I hope to do so for a very long time." My father, the tough, gruff, emotionally armored businessman I'd rarely seen so much as blink hard, actually got a little misty-eyed. "Well, good, that's good. Go on, both of you mingle." He gripped my shoulder as I turned to go. "Kai, be careful. I don't know exactly what happened between you and Julian, but I've noticed the way that boy looks at you lately. Like you're something he lost and wants back. Possessive men are dangerous. If only you knew, Dad. If only you knew how right you are. I'm careful, I promised, and I'm not alone." Nathaniel's hand found the small of my back, a silent, steady presence as we circulated through the crowd. I saw Julian before he saw us, holding court near the bar, surrounded by sycophants, his smile polished and perfect. Eli was beside him, laughing at something, eyes scanning the room out of old habit. Then Julian saw me. The change in his expression was subtle but deeply satisfying. His smile flickering, his posture shifting from relaxed to predatory. He excused himself and cut through the crowd toward us like a shark scenting blood. "Kai," he said, voice warm, eyes cold. "You look well, happy even." "Julian." I kept my tone neutral. "I am happy, actually. Thank you for noticing." His gaze flicked to Nathaniel, lip curling faintly. "Vaughn, didn't expect to see you here. I thought these events required an invitation." I slid my hand into his. "My plus one, my partner." The word hung there in the air between us. Julian's jaw tightened. How quaint! A summer fling. I suppose every young man needs a rebellious phase. But Kai, darling, don't you think it's time to stop this little game? People are talking. Your reputation. "My reputation is my own," I interrupted, my voice clear and carrying. Several nearby conversations died. Heads turned toward us. "And I'm not playing a game, Julian. I'm finally seeing things clearly. For the first time in years, actually." Julian's smile went fixed. "Dangerous. Is that so? And what exactly have you seen, Kai?" I stepped closer, close enough to smell his cologne, close enough to see the fury banked behind his eyes. "I've seen that you're a parasite. A handsome, charming parasite who feeds on trust and leaves nothing behind but ruin. I've seen that my best friend has been selling my family's secrets to you for months." I let my smile widen. "And I've seen that you've leveraged everything you own to acquire Nextlink Technologies. You've bet your entire fortune on it." Julian went very still. "How do you know about Nextlink?" "Because I know everything," I said softly. "And in about 10 minutes, Nathaniel's legal team is going to submit evidence to the SEC showing that your acquisition involved insider trading, financial fraud, and roughly a dozen other crimes that should keep you busy for the next several years." Oh, and Eli. I looked past Julian to where my former best friend stood frozen near the bar. "The FBI is waiting outside. They have questions about the encrypted files you've been sending to Julian's offshore accounts. I'd suggest getting a lawyer, a good one." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the room erupted. Julian grabbed my arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You little," he didn't get to finish. Nathaniel moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, stepping between us and shoving Julian backward with a force that sent him stumbling into a champagne tower. Glass shattered. Julian went down in a spray of golden liquid and crystal, his tuxedo soaked, his face a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "Don't touch him," Nathaniel said, quiet, carrying a terrifying weight. "Don't look at him. Don't even think his name. If you come near Kai again, Kane, I won't wait for the courts to deal with you. Do you understand me?" Julian scrambled to his feet, composure shattered, face red with humiliation. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll both regret this." But as security moved in, as the FBI agents I'd known would be waiting entered the ballroom, as Eli was walked out in handcuffs with his face ashen and his eyes refusing to meet mine, I knew it was already over. Julian Kane had lost. And I had won. Not because I was cruel, though a small part of me enjoyed this more than I was strictly proud of, but because I had finally chosen to protect myself. I had chosen to protect my family. I had chosen Nathaniel, and that choice had saved everything. The fallout was spectacular. Julian's arrest made national headlines. The evidence Nathaniel and I had compiled carefully and meticulously over months was ironclad. Insider trading, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. His empire crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. His assets were frozen, his allies scattered, his reputation reduced to ash. Eli, faced with the reality of decades behind bars, turned state's evidence. He testified against Julian in exchange for a reduced sentence, and in his confession admitted everything. The years of manipulation, the slow, systematic isolation, the way he and Julian had groomed me from the very beginning to be a useful, pliable tool. I read the transcript once. Then I burned it in Nathaniel's fireplace and made s'mores over the ashes. "Is that healthy?" Nathaniel asked, watching me roast a marshmallow with a fireplace poker. "Probably not," I admitted, "but it tastes like closure." He laughed and pulled me back against him on the rug. We were in his penthouse, city lights twinkling beyond the windows, fire crackling. It had been 6 months since the gala, 6 months of peace, of building, of simply living. Ashford Group was thriving. My father had made me VP of Strategic Development, a role I threw myself into with the kind of enthusiasm that surprised everyone except Nathaniel. Vaughn Holdings and Ashford Group had formalized a partnership, and together we were quietly reshaping the tech industry in ways that actually benefited people, not just shareholders. "Hey, Nathaniel," I said, turning in his arms to face him. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Back then, before I ever came to you at the restaurant, did you really love me for years? Even when I was awful to you?" His expression went soft, vulnerable. "Yes. Why?" He was quiet a long moment, thumb tracing patterns on my back. "Because you were kind," he said finally. "Even when you were pushing me away. Even when you were blind to Julian's cruelty, you were still kind. I saw you help a stranger pick up spilled groceries outside a gala once. I saw you cry during a documentary about shelter dogs. I saw the way you looked at your parents, like you loved them so much it ached. And I thought, that's the person I want to know. That's the person I want to love, even if he never once loves me back." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You're an idiot," I whispered. "A wonderful, romantic, stupid idiot." I kissed him, soft and slow. "I love you. I hope you know that. I hope you know I wake up every single morning and choose you, and I will keep choosing you until I run out of mornings." There was one visit I hadn't told Nathaniel about, because I wasn't sure yet what it meant. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I drove out to the minimum security facility upstate, alone, and sat across a scarred metal table from Eli Marsh. He looked smaller than I remembered, the boyish charm scraped down to something gray and tired, prison khakis hanging off a frame that used to fill a room just by walking into it. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't." I folded my hands on the table so they wouldn't shake. "I'm not here to forgive you, Eli. I want to be clear about that before you say anything, I know." He looked down at his own hands. "I keep trying to figure out when it started, when I stopped being your friend and started being whatever I was. I don't have a good answer. I think Julian just kept asking for small things, and I kept telling myself they were small until they weren't anymore, and it was too late to say no without admitting what I'd already done. That's not an excuse. I'm not giving you one." He finally met my eyes. "I just wanted you to know I understand there isn't one. 15 years, Kai. I taught you to ride a bike. I held your hair back more times than I can count. And I still sold every piece of you I could get my hands on, because Julian made it feel like keeping up, not selling out. I don't expect you to carry that. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who actually mattered. I didn't cry. I'd expected to, and I didn't. Instead, I felt something in my chest quietly close, like a door settling into its frame after years of hanging crooked. "Goodbye, Eli," I said, and I meant it as exactly that. Not cruelty, not forgiveness, Just an ending given on my own terms this time, instead of taken from me in a warehouse in the rain. I told my parents about the visit that same night, sitting at their kitchen table over the pot, roast my mother always made when she thought I needed feeding rather than talking. My father listened without interrupting, which for him was its own kind of grief. "You didn't have to go," he said finally. "I know. I wanted to close it myself. I spent so much of my life letting other people decide when things ended for me." I looked between them, my mother's hand pressed flat over her heart, my father's jaw working the way it did when he was fighting not to show emotion in front of his son. "I'm not doing that anymore." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. "You've changed so much this year, sweetheart. I don't fully understand how, but I'm not going to question it. I just want you to know we see it, and we're proud of you. Whatever it cost you to get here." If only you knew exactly what it cost, I thought, and squeezed her hand instead of saying it. There was one more thing I hadn't told him, and it had been sitting like a stone in my chest for 6 months. It happened on a quiet Sunday, the two of us sprawled on the living room rug with the Sunday paper and the ghost of coffee still on our breath, when Nathaniel finally asked the question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "Kai." He set down his mug. "That night at the restaurant, before any of this started, you already knew about Nextlink, about the shell companies, about Eli's files. You knew things a person couldn't have known unless—" He stopped, choosing his words with the same care he chose everything. "Unless you'd already lived through it." My heart stuttered. I'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times in my head and never once found the courage to have it. "What makes you say that?" "Because the first night you came to me, you looked at me the way people look at something they've already lost once." His voice was quiet, not accusing, just achingly honest. "I've spent my whole life reading rooms for a living, Kai. I know grief when I see it, even wearing a smile." So I told him. All of it. The warehouse, the rain, the blood on the concrete, his own voice, breaking as he begged me to stay. I watched his face go through disbelief, then horror, then something raw and reverent that I didn't have a name for. "You died in my arms," he said finally, very quietly, "in another life, and you came back, and the first thing you did with that gift was find me. You weren't a stranger to me by the time I found you again," I admitted. "I'd already loved you once, even if I didn't understand it, until it was too late to matter. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice." He was silent for a long time, staring at the framed photograph on the piano, the one of me laughing, taken years before either of us had any idea what the other would come to mean. "I kept that picture because some part of me always believed I was waiting for something," he said. "I just never imagined it would be you, coming back through time to save me from a future I didn't even know I needed saving from." "Technically," I said, my voice thick, "I came back to save myself. You were just an extremely attractive bonus." He laughed, wet, startled, real, and pulled me into his chest so tightly I could feel his heart slamming against my ear. "I don't care how it happened," he murmured into my hair. "I only care that it did, whatever life gave you back to me for. Kai, I intend to spend the rest of mine making sure you never regret spending it here." "Marry me," Nathaniel said some 7 months after that quiet Sunday confession, a year and a half all told, since the night I'd walked away from Julian's table. Both of us breathless on the rug in front of the fire, my ring finger bare and about to not be. I blinked. "What? Marry me?" He repeated it, voice steady and sure. "I know some people would call this fast. I don't care. We've been building this, really building it, not performing it, for a year and a half now. But I've loved you since the Hartwell Gala, Kai, which makes it going on 4 years, through every version of you I've ever known. Your blindness and your brilliance, your fear and your courage. I don't want to wait. I don't want to waste a single day that could be spent as your husband. So, marry me. Be my partner. Be my home." I stared at him, this powerful, brilliant, terrifyingly tender man who had loved me when I was unlovable, who had saved me when I couldn't save myself, who had given me a future I'd genuinely never thought I would live to see. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, laughing through tears. "Yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, yes, yes." He swept me up, spinning me around the living room while I shrieked with laughter, and when he finally set me down, he pulled a ring out of his pocket, a simple platinum band with a sapphire that matched my eyes. "I've been carrying this for 3 months, he admitted, sliding it onto my finger. "I was going to wait for our anniversary, but you looked so beautiful by the fire, and I couldn't help myself." You've been carrying an engagement ring around for 3 months, Nathaniel Vaughn, you sappy, secretive. He kissed me to shut me up. It mostly worked. The wedding was small, intimate, and perfect. We married in the garden of my parents' estate, under an arch of white roses and strung fairy lights. My mother cried. My father cried. Nathaniel's sister, who I'd learned was a terrifyingly competent corporate lawyer, and, underneath it, a secret hopeless romantic, cried the hardest of all. I wore a tailored ivory suit that Nathaniel had picked out himself, claiming he wanted to be the only one in a dress if I was going to look that good in pants. I told him he could wear a dress any time he liked. He threatened to spank me. I told him that wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The officiant cleared her throat, loudly. Nathaniel wore black, of course, but he'd added a sapphire tie that matched my ring, and my eyes, when I walked down the aisle. No, strutted down the aisle. His expression was so nakedly adoring I nearly tripped over my own feet. "You're late," he whispered when I reached him. "I'm fashionably late," I corrected. "You can't rush perfection, Mr. Vaughn. Soon to be Mr. Ashford Vaughn," he reminded me, eyes dancing. "Or you could be Mr. Vaughn Ashford," I countered. "I'm very modern. How about we just settle for husbands and call it even?" The ceremony was brief, sweet, and punctuated by my vows, which included a solemn promise to always tell him when he was being a dramatic goth, and a reference to his snoring that made the guests laugh out loud. Nathaniel's vows were more traditional but no less heartfelt, and when he said, "I choose you now and always," his voice cracked in a way that made my own throat close up. When the officiant finally pronounced us married, Nathaniel kissed me with a thoroughness that had my uncle whistling and my mother fanning herself, and then we ran down the aisle together, hand in hand, rose petals raining down around us. The reception blurred into dancing, toasts, and Nathaniel stealing me away to dark corners to kiss me senseless. At one point I found myself out on the balcony, looking up at the stars, his arms wrapped around me from behind. "Happy Mr. Ashford Vaughn?" he murmured against my neck. "Ecstatic," I said, leaning back into him. "Though I should warn you, I have a very demanding 5-year plan." "Oh?" "Year 1, honeymoon in Bali. Year 2, adopt a dog, a big one. Year 3, convince you to let me redecorate the penthouse. You want to destroy my minimalist aesthetic. I want to add color." "Nathaniel, 1 red pillow will not kill you." He sighed dramatically. "Continue. Year 4, start a foundation for at-risk youth. Year 5, I turned in his arms, looking up at his beautiful face, at the gray eyes that had watched over me across 2 entire lifetimes. Year 5, we do it all over again. Because I intend to spend every year I have left right here, with you, building something that lasts." Nathaniel was quiet a moment, his expression soft and open and so full of love it made my chest ache. "You know," he said finally, "when I was younger, I used to think home was a place, an address, a building." He shook his head slowly. "I realize now that I was wrong. Yeah? Home isn't a place." He brushed a strand of hair off my forehead. "It's a person. It's you. Wherever you are, Kai, that's where I belong. That's where I'm finally, completely, irrevocably home." I kissed him then, slow and sweet and full of everything I couldn't put into words. The love of a second chance, the joy of a future unwritten, the peace of knowing that whatever came next I would never have to face it alone again. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. "I love you more," he whispered back. "Impossible." "Prove it." So he did, for the rest of that night and for the rest of our lives. 3 weeks later, we lay tangled in white sheets in a villa in Bali, the sound of the ocean drifting through open doors, and I woke before he did, the way I always seem to now. As if some part of me still couldn't quite believe I got to keep this, and needed to check every morning that it was real. I propped myself up on one elbow and watched him sleep. Dark hair falling across his forehead, one hand curled loosely near mine on the pillow, like even unconscious he was making sure I hadn't slipped away in the night. The Ice King the business papers loved to write about, reduced to something soft and unguarded and entirely, quietly mine. I thought about the warehouse. I let myself think about it on purpose. The way you press a fading bruise just to prove it doesn't hurt the same anymore. The rain, the concrete. Julian's voice telling me broken things get thrown away. He'd been wrong about that, in the end. I hadn't broken. I'd just been waiting. Through one whole life and the first months of a second one. For someone who would never once think of me that way. Nathaniel's eyes opened, gray and soft with sleep, and found mine immediately, like he'd known I was watching even before he woke. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough. "You're doing the thing again, where you look at me like you're memorizing me." "I am," I admitted, Old habit. Come here instead of memorizing. He pulled me down against his chest, and I went easily, gladly, the ocean and the morning light and the whole unwritten future stretching out around us, like a promise neither of us intended to break. If this story kept you up past your bedtime, we want to know. Tell us in the comments which moment made your heart drop the hardest. Every like, share, and subscribe genuinely tells us to keep making more of these. So if you're in, hit that button before you go. Thank you for staying until the very end with us. We'll see you in the next one.